समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
The entire country is transfixed right now on this sordid story of the brutal murder of Raja Raghuvanshi, the groom who was just beginning his honeymoon, and among the prime suspects, besides what looks like a group of 3 hired killers, is also his wife,
Sonam,
who was arrested in Uttar Pradesh, far away in Uttar Pradesh. What this story has done, we are not talking about this story. As you may have figured from this setting, this is not an episode of Cut the Clutter. This is an episode of Writings on the Wall. And these are writings on the wall from where else but Meghalaya. Now, Meghalaya is a beautiful state with beautiful people. It's also a very lawful state, very welcoming of guests and very tourist friendly. Now what happened in this case was, because this murder took place so far away, and this tells me once again, there is something I used to say when I first went to cover the Northeast in 1981, that for most of the rest of us Indians, the Northeast is out of sight, out of mind, and we don't think about the Northeast unless there is a problem there. So right now, if you ask people what's happening in Tripura, most people will not be able to recall anything from the top of their heads in terms of what's happening in Tripura. The only state they'll focus on usually is Manipur, because Manipur has problems, or Nagaland, actively no problems. Mizoram, nobody thinks about these places, right? Out of sight, out of mind. Meghalaya was always, I would say, either you can say a victim of that syndrome, or maybe I would even go so far as to say it had the blessing that all of India's attentions were not on Meghalaya, because it was the quiet state. It was the quiet, peaceful state, which it still is. Over time, tourism has really boomed in Meghalaya. Tourists from all over the country have discovered Meghalaya as one more cool destination. Cool in many ways. It's cool for climate. It's cool for its landscapes. Not for no reason it was called Scotland of the East. It's still called Scotland of the East. It looks very similar also. In parts, very friendly people, very friendly food, also great taste in music. For example, Bob Dylan's birth anniversary is like a national festival in Shillong. You should go there and see the love that people have for music. So there is music, there is tribal culture. It is really such a great state to go to. And this great state, this great tiny state, got such a bad name over just a day and a half after this murder, because all kinds of stereotypes were then plugged, especially on television media. I think they got done with Operation Sindoor, and maybe they thought that one way of putting the infamy that they earned in Operation Sindoor, with all the stories of Karachi having been destroyed and Islamabad having been captured, Asim Munir having been arrested, etc., etc., they thought now they had found one more story. And once again, there and also in social media, these work in tandem. On some of our channels as well as social media, the immediate maligning of Meghalaya started. That this must have been a Meghalayan gang, maybe a drug running gang, maybe a gun running gang, maybe a human trafficking gang. So much so that even the families of the bride and the groom, they started even suggesting, particularly the bride's family, that she had probably been kidnapped, that this murder was carried out by human traffickers, right? And she had probably been kidnapped for sex trafficking in Bangladesh, because this place, Maula Khiat, the village or the region of Meghalaya, it's a beautiful place in East Khasi Hills. It has sheer drops. It's also the area where you might find rainfalls, particularly going some distance. You will also find Cherrapunji, which has the falls which was reputed to have the highest rainfall in the country. It is that beautiful part of the country. That's where the body was thrown off the cliff. And all these conclusions were drawn, and the state got a bad name until the story unraveled. The story unraveled. Now, we don't know who the guilty party is, who the guilty people are. That the courts will decide finally. But given the allegations now, the police case and the arrests, it does look like nobody local had anything to do with this murder. Nothing at all. Maybe they helped find the body. Maybe they helped find other evidence. Maybe they shared the grief of the family, but they had nothing to do with the murder. This happened within the family. I mean, how much it hurts the people of Meghalaya? Look at her Instagram and Twitter posts by Patricia Mukim. Patricia Mukim has been the editor of the Shillong Times. She is a highly respected editor, not just in the Northeast, not just in Meghalaya, not just in the Northeast, but across the country. She's among the most prominent journalists, editors of the Northeast. Look at her Instagram and Twitter posts that she's written. That is to say, listen, you better say Indore. Obviously, she's played on the word Indore because that's where this couple came from. But she's just said, listen, you stay where you are. Don't come to our state. In any case, don't bring bloodshed to our state. Where is that pain coming from? That pain coming from the fact that immediately people rushed to many conclusions, and they said, oh, this is a dangerous place. There are many gangs working. They hoodwink people, they can trap people, they can kidnap people, they can kill people. So all kinds of tribal stereotypes came into play. That is something then later you find that the Sangmas, Conrad Sangma, the chief minister, he's also spoken about because Meghalaya has only now opened up to tourism in the sense that connectivity has improved, new hotels have come up, homestays have come up. And Meghalaya homestays are very, very popular. It's also a very good way of learning about the people and the culture because it is so distinct from the rest of the country. And that's why it was so hurtful and so unfortunate that a lot of people dipped the broad brush into all these stereotypes and painted all of Meghalaya and its tribal populations with it. Now that situation has opened up, and now there should be some remorse in our minds also. I'm not saying in my mind, but generally in the minds of all those who jumped to these conclusions. And I thought that because this has brought Meghalaya into national headlines, because of an unfortunate murder, an unfortunate event, and also it is finally painting on our radar screen or finding a little bit of our mind space, I will share with you my writings on the wall from the state. Now, it's a state that I know well. Let me start my story then. Every reporter pays his dues covering one beat or one story in his lifetime or in her lifetime. I paid mine covering the Northeast between 1981 and 1983. Just as you can't get that out of sight, out of mind region on our front pages these days, then you couldn't keep it off. The 80s were the most perilous of what the American South Asianist Selig Harrison described as India's dangerous decades, and the seven sisters of the Northeast, now there is 8 because Sikkim has been added, the seven sisters of the Northeast had danger signs painted all over them. The Assam movement was at its peak, with supplies of crude oil to the rest of the country, to the mainland blockaded. Not a drop could reach the refinery in Barapani. Naga, Mizo and Manipuri insurgencies were active. There were killings of outsiders in Tripura, and even serene Meghalaya had its first brush with riots in what was called the anti-Dakhar, DKHAR, anti-Dakhar. Dakhar is for outsider outbreak. That eruption in Meghalaya was sharp but short. By the time I pitched tent in Shillong in January 1981, still the unofficial capital of the Northeast, peace had returned. You could walk on the streets safely at night. Even the joke used to be that you're perfectly safe at night unless you are sober. But that's a joke, right? Because it's a happy culture and a little tipple after sunset is a part of life. You could even drive to the only authentic Chinese restaurant near the Polo Ground where they served raw onions and green chilies with your greasy chop suey. In nearly 3 years of living in Shillong, in what's been the most wonderful period of my life, personally and professionally, I wrote almost no story on Meghalaya. There was no trouble there, no massacres, no ambushes, no insurgency, no human rights abuses, no secessionism, so no story. It was impossible to sell a Meghalaya story even to an Indian Express news desk run at night by a most benevolent and uncomplaining, besides sensitive chief sub-editor, namely Radhika Roy, yes, later the co-founder of NDTV. The usual question from the news desk used to be, but what is the story in Meghalaya? It was echoed in the question a Khasi civil servant once asked me. So Shekhar, how many plains people do we have to kill so you can get a Meghalaya story on your page 1? So the only Meghalaya stories I wrote then were Sunday features, gleefully accepted by Deena Vakil, who then worked at the Indian Express like most prominent journalists. In fact, I had initially written great journalists, but I know I have to be self-effacing. Or let me just say, like all great journalists, can't count me out. She worked at the Indian Express like all great journalists do at some point of time. One story I did was on Dolly Moore Wankhar, who made mementos from real butterflies. Meghalaya has beautiful butterflies, real butterflies. These were ashtrays, these were mugs like this, ashtrays, wall plaques, paperweights, anything with real butterflies embedded inside them. Real butterflies preserved and embedded inside them. That I believe stopped because they stopped the hunting of butterflies because they are an endangered species now. I did one also on the local pastime of Tir. Tir means arrow. This was mass archery. This game is mass archery. You can still go and see it. There you get prizes not for guessing who the winner will be. There you get prizes for guessing an intriguingly calculated number of hits rather than for backing the winner. How this works is, if you're on the circuit or if you're playing the game, people will ask you, what's the number for today? That generally means, very broadly, the number of hits that actually are scored by this team of archers that's firing away, right? So you have to guess the number. Not very different from some of the betting we might have seen with cricket. There was also one on the quaint old winery of Mofflong that made cherry brandy. That village is not far from Shillong. That winery that had a chimney looked like it had come straight out of the Scottish countryside. It made really syrupy cherry brandy, so syrupy that sometimes you wondered if they would be better off letting that sugar ferment a little bit more. And there was also one on tribal monoliths. In fact, these were the only ones I had seen outside of Asterix comics. And there are entire parks of them, particularly if you drive towards Cherrapunji. It's an hour and a half's drive out of Shillong. You will see them right along your route. The tribal communities put these up to commemorate their ancestors. The Khasis, the Jaintiyas and the Garos, the tribes of Meghalaya, had their own complaints too. But a combination of factors had always made them less alienated or angry. One of those was their very cosmopolitan city of Shillong. The other, just better connection with the rest of the country. The tribes had their political elites too, probably because as the capital of undivided Assam, they had a closer acquaintance with parliamentary politics. Shillong also had many very fine educational institutions to which tribal elites from other states sent their children, and where also children of Assam's elites studied. Remember, Shillong used to be the capital of combined Assam. Because of the kinship of common schooling, college education, and the usual tribal connections. There was also the factor, as I just mentioned, of closer acquaintance with parliamentary politics, because it was the capital of the entire state, entire full state. Before Nagaland, Mizoram, Arunachal Pradesh and Meghalaya all became states in their own right. Originally, it was just one state of Assam and Shillong was the capital. That's why even political cosmopolitanism came in. Now, local leaderships also rose. The Garos had their Sangmas, Captain Williamson, and then Puro Sangma, whose children now, Conrad, James and Agatha now run his party. They were the Khasis and Jaintiyas with their B.B. Lyngdoh, who was chief minister, P. Ripple Kindia, who was cabinet minister for a long time, and there are many others even now. The politics of the two regions was divided by geography and ethnicity. The Garos were predominantly pro-Congress, and to get to their district from Shillong, you still have to drive to Guwahati. Usually, the more efficient way is to drive. There is a direct road also now, takes about 8 hours, 7.5 to 8 hours. But it is still more efficient to drive to Guwahati, which is about 2.5 hours down, and then drive across Brahmaputra Valley towards the south and then hook back into Garo Hills. It's a good 8-hour drive either way from Shillong. In fact, a couple of years back, I had gone to Tura, which is the capital of Garo Hills, to deliver the Puro Sangar Memorial Lecture there. And I had then driven directly from Guwahati Airport along the Brahmaputra. It's a pretty good highway right now. You should check it out. It was also a very nice homestay at Tura where I was put up for the night. So while the Sangmas took to Congress early, the Khasi Jayantiyas, they are linked tribes, they preferred their own regional parties. One of the oldest among them was HSPDP, Hill States People Democratic Party, whose founder, Hopingstone Lyngdoh, was for a long time a cabinet minister, a very important politician, and for the longest time, the main opponent. In fact, he led the opposition to the exploration of sizable uranium deposits that Meghalaya hills have. And even Khasis and Jaintiyas, though similar, I told you they are linked tribes, but even though similar, Khasis and Jaintiyas have many differences. There was a time somebody launched an ethnic unity movement of sorts called Hynneutrep or Seven Huts movement. HYNNIEWTREP, Hynneutrep or Seven Huts movement, harking back to the old belief that both these tribes had been created from a common origin, namely the plumes from the trail, the multicolored plumes from the tail of a very colorful rooster, which still represents divinity in an intriguing sort of a way among these predominantly Christian tribes. That's a complex story which we'll tell sometime later, but I'm just giving you a brief summation of it. But even that Hynneutrep movement did not get any far because these are tribal communities which also hold on to their identity very dearly. They don't want it assimilated with any other identity any which way. Given the unfortunate criteria the media sets for news value, we've seen what's happened right now with this Raja Raghuvanshi case. Given the unfortunate criteria the media sets for news value, it was not such a bad idea from Meghalaya to have stayed out of the national headlines. Couple of years back, however, it did make the headlines because there were some protests and some riots there. We recorded a couple of episodes of Karta Clutter, of which I will share a link with you, but mercifully all that's over. There was a concern at some point that there was a fear that Meghalaya could go the way of Manipur, but no such thing happened. Local politicians, the central government, the police, they all handled it very well, for which they all deserve compliments and the nation's gratitude. But maybe it was also not so good to have stayed out of national read New Delhi's focus altogether, or it wouldn't have been so easy for these half dozen monstrosities to offend your eyes. I'm now giving you writings on the wall, and I will tell you what these monstrosities are. Because if there was more coverage, if national media had paid more attention to Meghalaya, it would not have been possible, I'm sure, for these half dozen monstrosities to offend your eyes and nostrils as you enter the bend into the Green Hills from Guwahati, from Jorabat, which is a kind of junction on Asian Highway 1, what is grandly called Asian Highway 1. It was meant to be the highway that would have gone into Myanmar and Thailand and onwards into China, etc., etc. It's still stalled. It's an idea whose time hasn't yet come, but it will come in the course of time. And as you turn into Meghalaya, you hope to catch the cool Meghalaya breeze. I went there in 2008 after nearly 25 years, right? Instead of the untouched green hills, the skyline of the foothills town of Bernihart or Bernihart BY, I noted was now dominated by a half dozen smoking chimneys of factories making, believe it or not, specialty bricks and ferroalloys. Now, who the hell allowed these to come up in Meghalaya of all places? They contribute nothing to the state by way of revenue, jobs, or even consumer needs. So why base such polluting and carbon dioxide spewing, power guzzling factories in a hill state when Assam's plains beckon just 5 miles downhill? And you know what? These stories don't leave us. Once you commit these crimes against nature, against the environment, and what happens? What happens? The price India pays for letting its distant regions go out of sight, out of mind is some dubious distinctions. If you saw the recently published list or the roll of dishonor of the most polluted places in the world, 6 of the 10 are in India,
8 of the 10
are in South Asia, but the most polluted place in the world, the honor or the dishonor of having, or I would say the dubious distinction of having the most polluted town in the entire world lies with Meghalaya. Poor little Meghalaya. Why? Because that town is Bernihart. In 2008, when I wrote a Writings on the Wall, I had noticed this, and this description comes from that Writings on the Wall, that this monster had come up, these monstrosities were coming up, and these have now resulted in Bernihart, in poor Meghalaya, being listed as the most polluted town in the world. In fact, one of these days, I will steal a couple of days or maybe 3 and go to Bernihart and write a more detailed story on this. As for these factories, these monstrosities, I am told these were permitted in the past mostly by Congress governments on the argument that Meghalaya had surplus power. Hello. And how much is the state's total generation? When I first checked out in 2008, it was 300 megawatts. Right now, it's 679 megawatts, of which hydropower contributes 500 megawatts, right? At that point, it looked surplus from, even 300 megawatts looked surplus for Meghalaya mainly because of economic backwardness. Meghalaya is still among the poorest states in the country. So it's 2 million plus people then. Now it might be around 3 million. Meghalaya has a high population growth rate. So it's 2 million plus, mostly poor people then, could not even use this much of power. By comparison, in 2008, Delhi's peak demand was 4030 megawatts, right? Compared to all of Meghalaya's 300. Today I told you all of Meghalaya is 679, of which hydropower is 500. Delhi's peak power demand 8656 megawatts last year. Even Gurugram's peak demand 2335 megawatts. So even now, all of Meghalaya is about 1/4 as much. And yet you said allow this power guzzling, smoke spewing factories to come up because the state has surplus power. It was also said that the state has coal, right? So coal is being taken far away to foundries in Ludhiana and places. It's very high quality coal. That is where rat mining is involved. So you can use some of it here as well. Now these factories vacuum clean so much of Meghalaya's power that Shillong has power cuts, right? New concrete buildings coming up all over Shillong have that shocking appendage to their terraces we have got so used to seeing in Delhi and elsewhere in the country, the diesel gensets. So you go out for a nightly stroll and smell diesel in the most brilliant, cool and moist breeze God created. The rustle of pines drowned in the hum of silent gensets. What this has also done is, it has given Meghalaya, which boasts the cleanest village in India, that is Maolin Nong, again a village to check out, it's a postcard village, Maolin Nong, the cleanest river in India, that is Umgot, right? That also has the dirtiest town in the entire world. And hello, how did we allow that to happen? And what is anybody doing about this? It is not, however, that the government is not trying to feed the monsters. The wonderful lake at Barapani keeps getting emptied out pre-monsoon at express pace because more power must be produced. Its storage from last year's terrific monsoon, I'm now giving you this impression from 2008, was squeezed out into the turbines so feverishly, and I'm sure this happens almost every year, so feverishly that it becomes nearly empty pre-monsoon. So empty, you can even see the remnants of the old highway which had been submerged when this reservoir was created. I could see that pain in the eyes of Prabhat De Savian and his meso-wife Partey. Prabhat is the scion of one of the most prominent and cosmopolitan Khasi families. His father, Lala De, was the Inspector General of Police, a job his brother then later held in the rank of Director General of Police. His sister, Bijoya De Savian, was a top model in Delhi, I think lives in Dehradun now. One of his sons was running, when I last checked, he was running a rock band in New York. The other was helping him manage the chain of hotels he's setting up, Prabhat is setting up. The apple of his eye is Rikinjai, Rikyinjai, Rikinjai. This is Khasi for Serenity by the Lake. So Rikinjai or Serenity by the Lake, exact translation. It's a tiny resort that he built by the side of Barapani. Prabhat graduated from Delhi School of Planning and Architecture, probably the first northeastern tribal to do so. And he designed the resort himself, building it almost entirely with local pine wood and his cottages in pure Khasi style. It really is a most wonderful gem, hidden so far away, and I would hope that it always remains filled up with guests. When I last met him, he said he waits for just two things. One, the return of water in the lake with the monsoon the following month, and the completion of the airport expansion work at the nearby Umroi. So direct flights would link Shillong with Kolkata and more tourists could come. Incidentally, don't be surprised if you find so many places named Umroi, I told you, is the name of the airport. Umsning is also the Khasi name of the Barapani lake. Similarly, there is Umdehar, and I just told you Umgot, that is the cleanest river in all of India. That's where you can actually see the fish floating under you from your boat, right? You also see many places with names beginning Maw, M-A-W. For example, the village where this horrible murder took place, Mawkliat, M-A-W, Mawkliat. The cleanest village, Maolin Nong, right? Then there is Mawflong, the village with the brewery, old brewery. I'm not sure it survives now. I'll be pleasantly surprised if it does. Mawsin Ram, the village with the highest rainfall, the village which competes with Cherrapunji often for the highest rainfall. You will see these figuring again and again. And Maw as you drive around Khasi Hills. In Khasi means water. And Maw literally means stone or a rock. My favorite spot on the drive, and that of anybody who often does the 150 km journey from Guwahati to Shillong, however, is the highway stop of Nongpo, Nongpoh, where earnest young Khasi women still serve round-the-clock jingbam means snacks, and meals through the day. These shops are still decorated with hanging, locally grown pineapples, papayas, bananas. Many have been replaced and gentrified. You've also had a couple of dosa, dhaba kind of places coming up. Couple of them, and people make stops there. I would still suggest, however, that you make a stop at one of these traditional places where prices are still from another innocent era. A meal of rice, pork, fish, chicken and lai patta. The delectable local mustard leaf for 4 will cost you at a stretch about 300 rupees, and the offer of a tip will be blushingly declined. Some other things haven't changed. On a 3-hour flight I once took from Mumbai to Guwahati, I chat with Sharon Para, a brilliant entrepreneur with a criminal psychology degree from NIMHANS, that is the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurological Sciences in Bengaluru, with experience of having worked with the UN in Bosnia and Eritrea, who now said she was building an already flourishing business in Muga silk, unique to Assam with gloriously golden silken thread, and Meghalaya turmeric, which she told me has 3 to 4 times more of the magical medicinal ingredient, curcumin, than turmeric grown elsewhere in the country. And she was then all of 33. Born to an Assamese tea planter father and a Jaintia mother, she obviously carries the mother's second name, as is the local custom. Her business card said her home is called Trillion House. What is Trillion? I asked. It's her grandmother's name, she tells me, and asks, don't you remember Shillong names? Million, billion, trillion. And you know, Sharon, I lost track of you after that conversation. So if you catch this, Please do get back in touch. Now, how could I have forgotten the names in Meghalaya? It took Sharon Para to remind me. Million, billion, trillion. Her grandmother's name was Trillion. When we first came to Meghalaya or Shillong in 1981, a neighbor told us, if you want to get used to the place, listen to the Western music request program every evening on AIR's Yuvani. At least you will get used to the local names. So we had then local star radio jockey Joan Pariat, an aunt of Sharon's incidentally, playing out Boney M, ABBA, Beatles and Bob Dylan to the request from efficiency, sufficiency, proficiency, firstborn, the middleborn, or forget me not, or even a wistfully. There were any number of Queen Elizabeths and Queen Victorias. There was also a cabinet minister called Dr. Barrister Pakim. It was therefore that when I first read that one of the Chennai Super Kings teams had a Napoleon Einstein in its ranks, my first reaction was that a Shillong boy had finally made it to the big league of cricket. He, however, turned out to be from Tamil Nadu. But things are changing too, and not necessarily for the worse in Meghalaya as well. On the thatched wall of my eating stop in Nongpo, I found a pamphlet from the Khasi Students' Union wing from Umdehar, a village of just a few thousand, announcing a T20 cricket tournament in 2008 with 10,000 rupees for the winners and rupees 100 for man of the match. Now, if KSU, Khasi Students' Union, which for so long fought against all outside influences, organizes cricket tournaments, it is change. The steep hill lane on top of which my tiny Pinewood cottage home was built and where any vehicle had to switch into the first gear while beginning the climb is now named after Lieutenant Clifford Nongrum. Lieutenant Clifford Nongrum is a decorated war hero from Kargil, probably the first from the Khasi Hills. And yes, Western music is alive and not just on Akashvani. Shillong now has more bands than most Indian metros, and Bob Dylan's birthday is celebrated like a national festival. That is why it is so much a pity we in New Delhi or Mumbai or Chennai or Bengaluru or Hyderabad or Pune still know as little or probably care as little about this most wonderful place as we did maybe 40 plus years ago when we first came to Shillong. And when the cashier at the Indian Express office had asked me in which currency he should send my salary. And when the truck company I approached for bringing my household goods from Chandigarh told me they did not have a service to Mongolia. Sure enough, Puro Sangar told me when I had gone to Shillong to record a walk the talk with him, he told me that after having been 5-term MP, a cabinet minister for a decade and speaker of the Lok Sabha, the odd fellow MP would still ask him, "So Purno, how's your Mizoram?" But Purno was never complaining. He was never the complaining type. In fact, complaining is not a popular pastime in the Meghalaya hills. From making music, catching butterflies and fish, to archery and now cricket also, Sangma's son headed the Meghalaya Cricket Association and lobbied strongly, fervently to get it recognized by the BCCI, and he thought it would happen courtesy Sharad Pawar, because then they were part of NCP. However, it did not need Sharad Pawar's help in the end. The Supreme Court decision and the restructuring of the BCCI, which gave one state, one vote, made that happen in any case. And yet, there are some complaints, like one of my old neighbors, Loris Mirthong, an economics professor, and his wife, Edwina Walang. Their cottage named Lely's Cottage, L-E-L-E-Y-S, Lely's Cottage. Why? Each letter representing a member of his family. Loris, Edwina, and daughters Larina, Elena, Yerlina, and Sabrina. Their cottage, when I last visited, I saw was the only survivor in the gentrified compound where we once lived. Even the house, the little cottage in which we lived, has now become a concrete multi-story house with no resemblance to the original. He has now, Loris Mirthong told me that he had to seek his Delhi-based airline stewardess daughter's good offices to go fishing upstream in Rishikesh. Almost 45 years ago, he taught my kid brother fishing in streams just a short trek away from our home. Now he told me remorsefully, we have rivers but no life with so much blasting and poisoning, and mountains with no water. India, after all, has caught up with Meghalaya, or is it the other way around? I don't know what to say. You look at the misfortune of Meghalaya having the distinction of having the most polluted town in the entire world, and at the same time, you look at the injustice that so much of our media, particularly social media, and served out this horrible, supercilious injustice to a place so far away, so small, and so beautiful, and so undeserving of this nonsense.